Holy water.
The 1970s were a wild time to be a filmmaker in Britain. At the time, the country was still clinging to its sense of post-war conservatorship. You know, the kind of moral code that made people uncomfortable even saying the word sex out loud. On the other hand, the cultural hangover from the 1960s sexual revolution was in full swing. The youth wanted freedom, and people wanted to break free of their moral code. Since art was growing bolder, cinema suddenly became the perfect battleground for rebellion. Directors started poking at every social taboo they could find, right from religion and class to violence, politics, sexuality. Well, the British Board of Film Classification didn't know what to do with it. Every other week, a movie was being chopped to pieces for corrupting society, but that tension created some of the most daring films ever made. Today, we'll be looking at 20 such insane films that redefined what British cinema could be, not to mention terribly shook the censor boards. Before we get into this explanation, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly, 1970. Freddie Francis's Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly is one of those strange little films that could only have been made in the early 70s. It's part dark comedy and part psychological horror, but what it is a completely unnerving film from start to finish. The story revolves around a bizarre upper-class British family living in a decaying mansion, refer to each other by childlike nicknames. Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly. Together, they lure outsiders whom they call new friends into their twisted family games. Once the guests are inside, they quickly learn that the rules are cruel, escape is impossible. Oh, and if you dare disobey your dear hosts, death is the outcome. The film was controversial for its use of perverse sexuality. The tone was deeply disturbing, and the manipulative mother-son dynamic made the censors uncomfortable. Now, there were a few critics who saw it as a thinly veiled satire of Britain's decaying class system, but others mostly dismissed it as tasteless. In the US, it was rebranded under various titles to highlight the sexual undertones, only added to its infamy. It was heavily edited for international markets and later vanished into obscurity, for a while at least. It then gained a cult-like following in the 1990s. Today, it's remembered as a deeply odd but daring piece of British cinema. Goodbye Gemini, 1970. Well, let's say Goodbye Gemini is one of the more haunting products of Britain's late 60s swingin' London hangover for something darker. Directed by Alan Gibson and based on Ask Agamemnon, a 1964 experimental novel by Jenny Hall, the film follows twin siblings, Jackie and Julian, as they arrive in London for a carefree adventure. But their overly close relationship hints at something unsettling. As they fall into the city's seedy underbelly filled with con artists, swingers, and prostitutes, moral decay of their bond grows increasingly obsessive, hinting towards an incestuous desire. The film's portrayal of that taboo subject was its biggest lightning rod. In an era where cinema was still adjusting to more open depictions of sexuality, Goodbye Gemini went straight for one of its discomforts. More importantly, the twin relationship was treated with ambiguity, which made people uneasy, because something like that should have been outright condemned. Promotional campaigns in the US leaned heavily on the twincest angle and made it far more explicit than it really was. Now, there were some people who appreciated the representation of London's counterculture, but most of them found it to be unnecessarily exploitative and morally bankrupt. Audiences were confused about whether to expect a lurid sex film or a crime thriller, and they got something in between. Though not officially banned, it faced significant cuts and was challenging to find for decades. Today, Goodbye Gemini is recognized as an uneasy gem that captured the dark side of youth liberation. The Devils, 1971. Few films in British history have managed to outrage censors quite like Ken Russell's The Devils. It was based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudon. The film delves into a real 17th century scandal. A French priest, Urbain Grandier, becomes entangled in accusations of witchcraft after rejecting a sexually obsessed nun named Sister Jean. What follows is a fever dream of religious hysteria and sexual repression, all wrapped under Russell's unapologetic style. It didn't take much time for the controversy to hit. Scenes of nuns in frenzy and naked exorcisms were too much for the British board. Warner Bros. Demanded severe cuts, and the film was either banned or heavily censored in multiple countries. Even decades later, full restorations remain hard to see. There's one infamous scene called the Rape of Christ sequence, for example, which was considered lost until some fragments resurfaced in the 2000s. Now, critics were sharply divided. Some called it blasphemous, while others, including film scholars and directors such as Martin Scorsese, hailed it as a masterpiece about the corruption of faith by political power. So it's easy to say it definitely left the audience stunned. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange hits like a punch to the senses. Viewers are dragged into a dystopian Britain where ultraviolence and warped pleasure go hand in hand. Alex DeLarge, played with chilling charisma by Malcolm McDowell, leads his gang of droogs on nightly rampages through the city where they freely rob, assault, and rape the disturbingly playful detachment. Kubrick's camera lingers on the chaos. To give it a signature twist, the main character commits these crimes while playing Beethoven in the background. The world he paints is unnervingly polished. You might find the streets empty, but they are teeming with danger. If you're wondering where the authorities are, well, they feel impotent. The film ignited immediate outrage, and rightly so for its depictions of rape and violence. It pushed British censors into a frenzy. Worse, real-world copycat incidents reportedly mirrored scenes from the film. Now, if you're going to do that, you obviously risk being accused of corrupting the youth at the time. In fact, in 1973, Kubrick himself requested Warner Bros. Withdraw it from British cinemas. The film was withdrawn and remained unavailable in the UK for nearly 27 years, until after Kubrick's death in 1999. Censors worldwide demanded cuts. The problem was clear. The film was scrambling to balance artistic intent with public morality. Today, A Clockwork Orange remains a study in discomfort. The film forces viewers to confront human cruelty. Straw Dogs, 1971. Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs is the kind of film that ignites arguments. It's set in a sleepy English village and follows American mathematician David Sumner and his wife Amy as they move into her hometown hoping for a quiet life. But the villagers resent outsiders, so David's pacifist demeanor is put to the ultimate test. The film's infamous rape scene is central to its controversy because it's not just the brutal violence on screen. Peckinpah forces the audience to sit with its aftermath to explore the shame and the societal pressures of masculinity. Censors recoiled immediately. The film was heavily cut in the US and other countries, with the rape and subsequent revenge sequences trimmed. The British Board of Film Classification considered the material shocking. Debate raged over whether audiences could handle the film's moral complexity. There's always a thin line between civility and savagery, and this film leans more to the misogynistic side. Over the years, Straw Dogs has been restored and reevaluated. It remains a polarizing work on the study of violence. Growing Up, 1971. Growing Up wasn't your typical classroom lecture in film form. It was a sex education movie that didn't shy away from showing what puberty, relationships, and intimacy really looked like. Unlike sanitized educational reels, this film took a candid and almost documentary-style approach. Scenes included teenagers navigating awkward first experiences, honest discussions about sexual health, very real, sometimes messy emotions that come with growing up. The depictions weren't sensationalized, but rather they were intentionally realistic to educate, but that very realism is what stirred the controversy. Censors recoiled at its frankness. Authorities in several countries argued that showing sexual acts or even simulated intimacy, even in an educational context, was obscene and could corrupt youth rather than guide them. Some theaters refused to screen it, while certain regions outright banned it because they thought it crossed the line between education and exploitation. The uproar was also about confronting cultural discomfort with openly discussing sex, especially on film. One might say Growing Up should be praised for being brave and honest at a time when sex education was necessary in society and yet deemed taboo, but mostly people condemned it for being sensational. Over time, the film gained a cult status among educators and historians interested in the evolution of sex education in media. While it's still flagged for adult content, modern audiences and scholars recognize Growing Up as a bold attempt to depict intimacy. Last Tango in Paris, 1972. Last Tango in Paris is the kind of film that makes polite dinner conversation nearly impossible. Starring Marlon Brando, the film tells the story of an anonymous sexual relationship between a middle-aged American man and a young Parisian woman. It's filled with raw passion and emotional chaos. The film is infamous for scenes of sexual intimacy that were shocking in their explicitness, and, as you can guess, the controversy erupted almost immediately. People accused it of glorifying sexual violence. In Italy, it was banned and only allowed after cuts. In several countries, the film faced legal battles for obscenity. The infamous butter scene in particular became a cultural flashpoint, sparking debates about consent and the limits of cinematic art. Even decades later, it remains a lightning rod for discussion around the ethics of filmmaking and actor consent. Reactions were wildly polarized. People condemned it as salacious and morally corrupt. Audiences either left the theater stunned or outraged. Over time, Last Tango in Paris was restored and widely released, though it still carries a heavy 18+ warning in many regions. The Sex Thief, 1973. Martin Campbell made his feature debut with The Sex Thief, a racy British comedy thriller that immediately ran headfirst into censorship troubles. The story follows a charming cat burglar named Grant Henry who breaks into the homes of wealthy women and, instead of robbing them of jewelry, seduces them. The film treats his escapades like cheeky adventures with over-the-top humor and increasingly absurd situations. Still, it's this mix of sexual playfulness and non-consensual undertones that landed it in hot water. Censors objected to scenes where seduction blurred close to assault, and despite the film's comedic tone, the British board deemed several moments unacceptable. Cuts were demanded before release, and international versions varied wildly in explicitness. In the US, it was marketed as softcore erotica. In Britain, it was nearly banned outright. Critics were largely unimpressed by this juvenile sexist endeavor. Audiences, however, made it a modest success on the exploitation circuit, particularly in Europe where censorship was looser. For decades, the film existed mainly in censored prints and uncut versions that were circulated quietly among people. Only much later did it gain curiosity value as an early work from a future Bond director. Today, it's remembered less for its titillation and more as a symbol of how the early 1970s often failed to understand what sexual liberation really meant. It doesn't take a genius to know that this was made by a bunch of delusional men who have little to no idea what women really find desirable, even acceptable, in men. The Wicker Man, 1973. Step onto Summer Isle and you will immediately feel off-kilter. Robin Hardy's The Wicker Man immerses you in a world where everything is bright and sinister at once. Police Sergeant Neil Howie arrives expecting a simple missing persons case, but the villagers' constant singing and their sun-drenched rituals signal that this is no ordinary community. Women dance in flowing dresses around maypoles. Men chant in ways that feel both hypnotic and menacing. Every interaction seems layered with secret meanings. Hardy frames it so that the island itself becomes a character, and this character is hiding danger beneath idyllic surfaces. Censors recoiled at the audacity of it all. Scenes of pagan ceremonies, fertility rites, and the shocking climax, just a little bit too much for Christian audiences. The film's open embrace of pagan rituals made many Christian viewers uncomfortable. The 70s wasn't exactly open to such themes. People thought it was blasphemous and morally corrosive. The British Lion Film Studio demanded cuts because they felt that the film was too complicated for general audiences. Several international releases removed key ritual moments, dulling the tension and horror that made the film unforgettable. Audiences, however, couldn't look away. The combination of music, choreography, and the slow, inevitable horror of Howie's fate kept people talking long after the credits rolled. Restored versions finally bring back Hardy's full vision. The Exorcist, 1973. The Exorcist hit theaters in 1973 like a lightning bolt wrapped in holy water, which wasn't subtle at all. The film follows a young girl, Regan, who becomes possessed by a demon, prompting two priests to perform a grueling exorcism. But what really stirred the pot was the way the movie openly confronted religion. And when you mix blasphemy with body horror, the censors do tend to get nervous. In the UK, officials delayed its release at the local levels because they feared how realistic the possession looked, not to forget the tensions that might rise because the church was openly challenged. It starts way out in northern Iraq, where an old priest named Lancaster Marin is excavating ruins and finds a creepy talisman of a winged demon named Pazuzu. Back in Washington, D.C., actress Chris McNeil is living in a big house with her 12-year-old daughter, Regan, who is showing increasingly ominous signs of possession. We'll leave the rest for you guys to watch, since the reactions when it was released in theaters were insane. Moviegoers reportedly vomited, fainted, and even suffered heart attacks in theaters. You might want to praise the masterclass intention that this movie created, but well, it was just way too scary for some folks. Maybe because of its controversial nature, the film quickly cemented itself as a horror landmark. Today, The Exorcist exists in fully restored versions, no longer banned or hidden away. While audiences still flinch at Regan's infamous antics and the movie's intense sequences, it's widely regarded as one of the most influential horror films ever made. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't waste time introducing horror. We get thrown straight into a nightmare on wheels. A group of friends stumble upon a family of cannibals in rural Texas, including Leatherface, who wields a chainsaw like it's part of his personality. Its almost documentary-style realism gave audiences the creeps. Well, it's quite close to what could happen in real life. Across the pond, the UK didn't quite know what to do with it. The film became infamous as a video nasty, a label slapped on certain movies in the early 1980s that authorities claimed were excessively violent. So, at the time, it was outright banned because the censors feared it might encourage copycat behavior, or traumatize viewers. Audience reactions were intense. People who watched it often reported sleepless nights and lingering anxiety, while critics were polarized. It was deemed too cruel and nihilistic to enjoy. Eventually, the ban was lifted, and the film found its place as a cult classic and a blueprint for slasher movies. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth is one of those films that feels like it was beamed straight from another planet because, well, it stars David Bowie as Thomas Jerome Newton, who was an alien who came to Earth seeking water for his dying planet. At first, Newton appears otherworldly but harmless. As he adapts to human society, the film explores his isolation and fascination with human sexuality. And there you have it, a blend of sci-fi with psychological drama in Roeg's signature non-linear style. The controversy wasn't just in its story, it was Bowie himself. His almost asexual presence, combined with the film's frank depictions of nudity, made censors uncomfortable. Certain scenes involving sexual situations and partial nudity were cut or censored in both the UK and US releases. The ambiguity of Newton's sexuality, coupled with the film's surreal imagery, challenged traditional ideas of morality, especially in mainstream cinema. We might look at it as a groundbreaking exploration of capitalism and human desire, but not everyone got that. Audiences were similarly split and somewhat intrigued by Bowie's performance. Over time, The Man Who Fell to Earth achieved cult status, with restored versions bringing back censored content, fully showcasing Roeg's vision. Today, it's recognized as a daring blend of sci-fi and adult themes, which is kind of a rare combo. The Stud, 1978. If you ever wanted a front row seat to the sleazy side of 1970s London nightlife, The Stud delivers it in all of its champagne-soaked glory. Based on Jackie Collins's best-selling novel of the same name and starring Joan Collins, the film tells the story of Fontaine Khalid. She was a glamorous but ruthless socialite who owned a swanky nightclub and treated men like playthings. Her current obsession is Tony Blake, played by Oliver Tobias, the club's handsome manager who juggles multiple affairs while trying to climb London's social ladder. It's all sex and scandal and high society betrayals. What made it controversial was how boldly it showcased female desire without apology. The film didn't shy away from threesomes or nudity, and let's just say British censors weren't thrilled about that. Critics accused it of glamorizing immorality, while the BBFC demanded several cuts before giving it a release. It's not hard to imagine how some people might call it a trashy soap opera. Women owning their pleasure is still a taboo topic to this day in certain countries. Despite, or maybe because of the backlash, The Stud was a massive box office success, especially among audiences who loved its unapologetic glitz. Critics rolled their eyes, but moviegoers couldn't get enough of Joan Collins's commanding performance. Far from being banned, The Stud actually paved the way for its even racier sequel, Bitch. Today, it's remembered as the film that turned disco and desire into pop culture gold and made Joan Collins a legend of late 70s glamour. The Bitch, 1979. Following the wild success of The Stud, Jackie Collins and her sister Joan doubled down with The Bitch. This sequel only turned up the glamour and greed of London's late 70s elite. Joan reprised her role as Fontaine Khalid, who was now divorced and drowning in debt, but she was still addicted to her luxurious lifestyle. All would have been great, but she got entangled with a younger man and a shady underworld deal involving stolen diamonds. Fontaine's world of cocktails and couture begins to spiral into something much darker. The controversy came from how brazenly the film flaunted sex. It's safe to think people were rather upset that Fontaine wasn't punished for her excesses. Rather, she enjoyed them. That's a sin in most people's eyes, and the explicit bedroom scenes, nudity, and cocaine-fueled parties only further tested the limits of what British censors were willing to tolerate. Though the BBFC eventually approved it, cuts were made to tone down its graphic moments. The critics called it vulgar and empty. The actual audience loved every scandalous minute. The movie was a hit in cinemas yet again, and Joan Collins became a sex symbol, which she later channeled into her dynasty fame. Well, The Bitch was never banned. It was often condemned on moral grounds and shunned by TV broadcasters for years. But, in all honesty, it was a celebration of hedonism that reflected exactly what Britain's upper crust didn't want to admit about itself. Caligula, 1979. Caligula is the kind of movie that feels like someone took Roman history, threw in a ton of sex, and then added a dash of shocking brutality to make sure no one walked out unbothered. The film follows the rise and fall of the infamous Roman emperor Caligula, and if you're a history buff, you already know how that ship sinks. The film shows his descent into cruelty, Roman-style debauchery, well, the absolute madness. But it was the unsimulated sexual content woven straight into the story that really grabbed eyes. No one watching expected a historical epic blending with outright pornography. The controversy was also immediate since the censors across the globe recoiled at the combination of graphic sexual acts and shocking depictions of violence. In many countries, the film was outright banned. Even in places where it premiered, theaters hesitated to screen it to avoid religious groups creating a scene. Audience reactions were equally extreme. People either flocked to see it out of curiosity or avoided it entirely. With time, multiple versions have circulated while restoring previously censored material and others trimming the most shocking sexual content. Today, Caligula is remembered less as a historical epic and more as a notorious experiment that pushed boundaries. Marvelous verdict. Looking back, these films looked like scandal machines, but they were way more than that, because they were just a representation of Britain's uneasy relationship with sex and violence. What had once triggered bans now reads as a bold challenge to the establishment. Now, whether it's The Exorcist scaring audiences into prayer or Growing Up, which taught lessons most adults wouldn't dare whisper, some of these films were bold explorations that needed to see the light of day. Today, the shock value feels almost quaint, but the courage behind these works remains undeniable. In a way, these controversies shaped a generation of filmmakers who understood that art's power often lies in discomfort. So, what do you think about these films? Should artistic expressions today be censored like before? Or are we in a new era of liberation that's necessary? Do let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and if you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons so we can bring you more deep dives like this. We really want to, but we need those positive numbers before we can. Unfortunately, that's all we got for you this time, but stay woke and stay safe.